I love how it always reminds me that this is about to be streamed live. It's like, yes, I know, I'm the one who clicked the button. All right, looks like it might actually be working, which is always handy. Okay, look at that. Technology didn't cause too many problems today. That's always nice. Just give it one more second and then we'll get down to work. For those of you that would like to look up your own copy, we are on Exodus 34 and we'll be beginning with verse 27. All right, let's go ahead and get down to work. Like I mentioned, we are in Shemot 34, verse 27. But before we get into that, we have to do a little more recent history. And by more recent history, I mean 500 years ago rather than 2,500, 600, 700, 800 years ago. And that is going to take us to a small little corner of the world known as Rome, known as Vatican City. And I have had the pleasure of being in the Vatican myself. And while there, I saw this beautiful statue of Moshe. This is Moses. This was carved by Michelangelo and is considered among his many masterpieces. Now, you know he's Moses because he has two tablets under his arm. And if we had a 3D model, you could see that they are meant to be representative of the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. And you can also tell it's Moses because of his horns. If you can't see that too clearly, we'll do a little bit of a close-up shot. Moses has horns, like everybody knows. And that's how you can tell in a huge area with many statues of different biblical figures. That's how you know this is Moses at a glance, by the horns. Now, some of you are probably scratching your head. Wait, did it only just now go to screen share? I got a notification that you can now see my application. Did that only just happen, or have you been seeing it for a while?
I've been able to see it all along.
Okay, good. Just a very late Zoom notice. I wanted to make sure I wasn't narrating a blank screen. So Moses is very famously depicted in Michelangelo's work with horns, and indeed many artistic renderings of Moses have him with horns, and indeed many not so flattering portraits of Jews are depicted with horns. Now, on the one hand, very easy to say that depicting Jews with horns was a common caricature as part of the so-called demonic origin of Jews, which has its own long and disgusting history throughout anti-Semitism, and is extremely problematic, of course, for those religions that profess it. But we would still assume that even if someone was going to depict Jews with devil horns because they were evil, that depicting Moses with horns might be problematic, because whatever anti-Semites say about Jews in general, most of them have a hard time, especially among our Christian neighbors, talking dirt about Moses. I mean, Moses is Moses, for crying out loud, and making him look bad just looks bad. There are theological reasons why Moses needs to be sound and secure within the pantheon of Christianity in order to justify using our Torah, as some have attempted to read it, as presaging the coming of Jesus. You need Moses to be legit. You need him to be accurate. You need him to not be a devil. So what do we do with the horns on this guy? Why would Michelangelo or any of the other artists of the time think of sticking horns on somebody that is revered. Horns on the rest of us, we can kind of understand. Not that it's true, but we can at least understand where the anti-Semitism comes from. Horns on Moses seems completely unjustified until you begin to read the Torah. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, is why they think these might be horns, why they might be right and wrong, of course, but right in a way and wrong in all of the other ways. And what does our own tradition say about this particular passage? And of course, we don't actually depict Moses with protuberances from his head. So let's go ahead and get down to the Torah and see what it has to say about all of this. As mentioned, we are on chapter 34, verse 27 to begin our discussion. Oh, and the mouse is already rolling before I've moved it. And Adonai said to Moses, write down these commandments for in accordance with these commandments, I make a covenant with you and with Israel. Again, I would have preferred had they used the actual word Devarim, or the translation of these words or these matters, rather than commandments, which really should be reserved only for the word mitzvah. But the basic idea is nonetheless preserved, that God is asking Moses to write down the record of the exchange between him and God, where he has been back up on his second or third journey, rather, to God, the second time up for a collection of a copy of the tablets. The first tablets having been shattered at the foot of Mount Sinai during the golden calf incident. So Moses is back up. He has got a second set. He is coming down with them now. And that is where we are getting this instruction. As we see in 28, and he was there with Adonai 40 days and 40 nights, meaning at the top of the Mount Sinai. He ate no bread and drank no water, and he wrote down on the tablets the terms of the covenant, the 10 commandments, Aseret HaDevarim. Moving on to 29. So Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as Moses came down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, Moses was not aware that the skin of his face was radiant, since he had spoken with God. Now, the skin of his face was radiant is our magic phrase that is going to be up for a translational wrestling match when we get to our commentary. It says literally karan or panav, right? That this is the flesh of his face, the or panav, is karan. Now, karan is being translated here in the JPS translation as being radiant. And there's good reason for that, as we'll see from the commentary in more detail. But the shorthand is that karan can mean to literally be rays of light, beams of light, as you can see from my background image for the class. On the other hand, those same 3 letters, the kuf resh nun, can also mean a horn, a slightly different vocalization, remembering that in Hebrew, the consonants are what are fixed and the vowels change, and that often will change meaning completely. Sometimes it'll change meaning adjacent. It's also how you conjugate and do many other things, but the 3 core letters they are identical. So you could say instead that he did not know that there were horns on the flesh of his face. And then he, because God had spoken with him. So this is the source of the confusion. And we're going to come back to that word confusion in a second, because I don't think this was accidental. But this is the source of the idea that led to a depiction of Moses, like Michelangelo's, with horns sticking out of the top of his head. Everyone with me so far? Good. Verse 30. And Aaron and all the Israelites saw that the skin of Moses' face was radiant, or he had horns, and they shrank from coming near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the chieftains in the assembly returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterwards, the Israelites came near, and he instructed them concerning all that Adonai had imparted to him on Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. Whenever Moses went in before Adonai to converse, he would leave the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what had been commanded, the Israelites would see how radiant the skin of Moses' face was. Moses would then put the veil back over his face until he went in to speak with God. So I just want to make sure we have the costume changing understood here, because it's a little awkward in the English. Moses realizes that his face is shining. It is extremely off-putting to the average person who is like back in awe. And what the solution is that when he talks to God, meaning in the Ohel Moed, whenever he is talking to God, he has nothing covering his face. It is face to face, as discussed elsewhere in the Torah. When he comes out and teaches to the people, likewise, it is face to face to the nation, and there is nothing covering his face, and he is beaming as we wish to imagine this looking. When he is not actually teaching and not actually talking to God, then he wears a veil over his face. Everyone got the idea here? All right. So Moses glows. It is kind of impressive. It is kind of amazing. It is also kind of confusing. Setting aside the confusion over the horn business, which, like I said, we'll discuss with our commentators, we also just have to try and wrestle Jewishly with, if he was beaming out light, why? Why was he beaming out light? What was this supposed to accomplish? Was this just so that, he wouldn't need to burn oil when he was, staying up late? Was this to make it easier to find him in the dark? What was the purpose? And why did he, of all of the people throughout all of Tanakh, have this unique feature coming from his encounter with Adonai? So I want to make sure that we will talk about the horn issue, but that we also recognize that could be a little bit of a distraction from some of the other wisdom we can learn from the fact that this took place at all in this radiant kind of way. But before we jump into our commentaries, always time for additional questions or additional comments. That's the open mic invitation. Not seeing anyone typing on YouTube, although I know they're always a few seconds behind us. And no one is unmiking, so let's go ahead and see what our tradition does with this. All right, so first I just want to point out that there is a very important timeline for all of this that is something that we should know as part of our tradition. It says, Fizkuni, Moses descended on a Tuesday, the 10th day of Tishrei, after Moses having been on the mountain for the third time for 40 days. So when you do the math and work out Moses going up for the first tablets, coming down, breaking them, going up to talk to God and trying to reconcile God to the nation, coming back down, going back up to the mountain and doing the second tablets and coming down. If you do the math of when this took place based on when Shavuot happened, the giving of the Torah in the first place, it works out that Moses would have been coming down finally on the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. Now, you may be thinking, that's great. We know when Moses came down. Shouldn't this be a holiday or something? Well, it is. The 10th day of Tishrei is actually an incredibly important and famous holiday. And it already has a very special name, Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei. And Yom Kippur is considered to be the day when Moses returned with that second set and with a sort of final understanding of God's forgiveness and embracing of the nation to go forward. And that is, of course, an incredibly important spiritual insight for ourselves to hold on to during that day of Yom Kippur, that we recognize that even this, God is willing to forgive when the people made tshuva, that even with this breach, there was a way through the path of repentance that things could be brought back together. So on Yom Kippur, never think that it is impossible to return. we have seen the impossible happen on this day in particular, and it is something that we've been needing ever since. All right, but let's get back to our actual question about the glowing. So beginning with the Talmud, we have to first wrestle with this idea that it says Moses doesn't know that his face is shining, which I don't know whether you scratched your head when we came across that, but the Talmud certainly did, but it tries to give us an initial understanding. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, one who gives a gift to his friend need not inform him, meaning that he has given it to him, and he need not concern himself that the recipient might not realize who gave it to him. That giving a present in secret to someone is okay. Now, for most purchases, that's not true, right? If I am selling you my phone, you need to know me, I need to know you, and you need to know when I deliver it, and I need to know that you received it from me. All of that has to be very clear. But when it comes to a gift, the rabbis say, no, a gift could technically be given without that knowledge, and that's okay. It still counts, it's still a gift, and it's not a violation of the normal rules of transferring property. How do we know this? That a gift can be given without a person knowing and it's still okay? As it is stated, Moses did not know that the skin of his face was radiant. So the proof that you can give a gift to someone else and not have to be overly worried if they know exactly who sent it comes from God giving a gift to Moses, the gift being the shininess of his face, which he did not know about. So in typical fashion, we are looking to the text of the Torah itself to try and illuminate this issue. And in very typical fashion, the rabbis are drawing on a verse that most of us probably would not have thought was related to gift giving, but instead it is. Now, we will come back to this question of, well, why the gift and why Moses deserved it and why this particular gift itself. But for the moment, I promised we would talk about the horns. So let's talk about the horns. So if we go to Rashi, who gives an excellent summary, as always. He says that the word for ray, this karan, is an expression connected with the words karnim, right? Karanim, that these are the horns, right? That if you're talking about a bull, they have horns. If you're talking about a ray of light, it is the same root. And the phrase, the light ray or horned, meaning what Moses's face was happening, is used here because light radiates from a point and projects like a horn. So in English, we often use idioms that are pointing to the physical properties of something, even if it is not physical. We will take the English word wave, which originally meant those up and down things in the ocean, and we'll use them for sound. Why? Not because we can actually see an up and down motion in sound, at least not with our naked eye, but because that does actually describe very accurately what's going on. And that makes sense. So too, the Hebrew word for horn makes sense when talking about light, because, well, that is kind of what light looks like when it radiates out from a point. Again, I will point to my illustration behind me, that the little spiky bits that come out of light, or the little spiky lines that shoot down through the breaks in the clouds, well, those might as well be called horns as much as be called rays or beams or anything else that we want to describe them as. So indeed, the word is connected to the word horn. It's just, we believe that this is not talking about horns, but talking about the horn-like shape of light, which indeed light does look like when it is being projected from a particular point. Does everyone understand Rashi's argument here? Okay, but you may be still saying to yourself, but wait a minute, if they are fundamentally very, it means horn, and when it means light. Well, context, as Ibn Ezra is going to explain for us. The word karan, meaning sent forth beams, this radiation, is related to karnaim, the rays. In, for example, from Habakkuk, rays he has set at his side. For in the opening of that verse in Habakkuk, it explicitly states, and a brightness appears as the light. Now, since raise as he has set it aside follows, our verse repeats the same idea in different words, as is the custom of Tanakh. Ibn Ezra is talking about what's called parallelism, meaning that the Tanakh will often have the first and second half of the verse be describing roughly the same thing with slightly different poetic style or emphasis. And since the first half is clearly talking about light, we should think the second half is talking about light, because after all, that makes sense, rather than thinking suddenly we're talking about physical animal type horns. And then he does a little bit of trash talking. May the bones of Chivi the transgressor be crushed. Now, Chivi the transgressor is referring to a Persian Jewish commentator from the 9th century who had a very naturalistic explanation for everything. He was somebody who tried to demythologize the text, tried to transform it from being miraculous into being mundane. For example, in other places, Ibn Ezra brings the quote from him about the idea that Moses just knew the tide table, and that's how he knew when to cross the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. It had nothing to do with a miracle. As you can imagine, Ibn Ezra and traditional sources are not fond of this kind of argument. And he's also going to point out that not only is his argument problematic religiously, but it is also illogical. So let's see what Chivi argued with. For Chivi said that Moses' face turned dry as a horn because he did not eat bread. Remember, the text itself said that there was this horn skin that was happening on his face. And Chivi said, all right, if it's talking about horn skin, it must be horned skin, meaning the skin itself must look like the texture of horn. And why would that happen? Because he wasn't eating. Right? Notice, of course, that he thought that it was possible to live for 40 days without eating, but that's neither here nor there. Chivi similarly explains, and they were afraid, meaning the people who saw Moses when they went, as meaning that they were afraid because Moses' face was ugly, right? He came down and now he was hideous after 40 days up on the mountain. Now, why did this cursed wretch not open his eyes? And yes, I really do enjoy the trash talking the rabbis give sometimes. If this is the case, if Chivi was right, why was the veil not always upon the face of Moses? Right? If he was really now mutilated and hideous, then I think that's the kind of thing that he would always want to cover. Why did Moses always remove the veil when he spoke with Israel? If he's trying to impress them, you don't think he would go, hello, I'm hideous under here when trying to teach? That's exactly the moment when he'd want to keep it down so that people were not distracted by his mutilation. Did Chivi not see that when Moses was 120 years old, his eyes were not dim and his natural force abated, nor his natural force abated? This was most certainly so when Moses was 80 years old, which is when all of the events of Exodus are taking place. So Ibn Ezra points out that even if we wanted to say there were horns or horn skin, it just logically doesn't work within the context. We don't have any reason to believe that there were physical changes, that instead the more simple understanding is to translate this word as being radiant, as having rays of light coming out. However, we still need to understand, why would this be happening to Moses? Why this light? What is this trying to symbolize? For our first stab at that, we are going to take a look at the Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim, written by Rambam. Do not imagine that these most difficult problems, he's talking about many of the difficult texts in general, can be thoroughly understood by any one of us, right? Just understand this. You and I and everyone else around us will never completely understand all of the mysteries of Tanakh and of God and religion, okay? Just understand that. We're never going to understand it 100%. At times, the truth shines so brilliantly that we perceive it as clear as day. Our nature habit then draw a veil over our perception, and we return to a darkness almost as dense as before. We are like those who, though beholding frequent flashes of lightning, still find themselves in the thickest darkness of night. So for the average person, we get glimpses, insights, flashes of light that help us understand this moment or this topic or this idea. And for those moments, it's clear and crystal and bright, and we may hold on to it, but everything else around it is still shrouded in darkness or misunderstanding or difficulty. And even if we have frequent flashes, we still recognize that the strobe effect is not actually lighting everything. It's only lighting that singular moment of clarity. Now, on some, meaning for some people, the lightning flashes in rapid succession, and they seem to be in continuous light, and their night is as clear as the day. This was the degree of prophetic excellence attained by Moses, the greatest of prophets, to whom God said, "But as for you, stand you here by me," from Deuteronomy, and of whom it is written, "The skin of his face shone," from the text we've been wrestling with. So why did Moses shine? Because he was literally being illuminated by the understanding of God at a constant rate. It's just like if you were to look at our wonderful LED light bulbs. If you had a fast enough camera, you could see that they are actually flickering. It's just that they flicker so fast that it looks like they are constantly on. So too for Moses. Moses was being illuminated so continuously and so rapidly by his deep understanding of God that he was in a constant state of light, of illumination. But for others, by others, this illumination only happens once during the whole night and is like a flash of lightning perceived. This is the case with those of whom we are informed they prophesied and did not prophesy again, also taken from the book of Numbers. So some people get a flash once, some people get a flash a few times, some people get a flash all the time. And a flash all the time is called light. Make sense? So Moses glowed because Moses knew. Okay. However, I love continuing with the howevers because there's always something else that we need to try and unpack. We still have this question of he glowed but didn't know it. And that is problematic. One attempt at answering that. This leaves us with a strange phenomenon that a human being should be unaware that his face emits rays of light, right? Moses didn't know he was shining. That's kind of weird. Even if we can understand that he was shining because of his brilliant understanding of God, didn't he notice that he was shining? Everyone else did. This is especially so if we assume the source of these rays to have been some kind of horn-like protuberance on his forehead. Again, the idea that there was some part of him that was the locus of the emission, the font of light, if you will, like Rashi said, that it was beaming out from that point. Surely, if it's beaming from the front of your face, you're going to notice this. Maybe if it was on the back of his head, maybe we could sort of understand he didn't notice it, because, if he looked around, it was behind him. But it's right up there. Couldn't he have noticed that there was light shining off of the front of his face? Surely, Moses must have noticed that he suddenly possessed such an additional feature. I guarantee you, if I strap a light to your head while you're asleep and turn it on, when you wake up, you will instantly notice that there is light coming from your forehead. But as long as he had been on the mountain, Moses assumed that any radiation of light he saw had originated with God, who was speaking to him. Right? Moses is up in God's presence, and there is light everywhere. So, of course, he just assumes the light's from God. He would never think it was from him. This light disappeared during his descent, because he wasn't with God in that way. He therefore assumed that the light he was still conscious of was emitted by the tablets. Here I am holding the tablets of the covenant. They must be shining. They must be illuminating the world around me. That must be the light that I am noticing. He had no idea that he himself had become a permanent source of such light. As soon as he deposited the tablets and he became aware that the light had not departed, he realized that he himself was the source of the light, and he immediately covered himself with the veil. So by looking very carefully at the staging of our verses, of Moses being on the mountain, descending the mountain, and bringing the tablets, and then being noticed as having the light, Or HaChaim understands why Moses would have not recognized that he was the origin. On the mountain, he would have thought it was God. With the tablets, he would have thought it was them. Only when he was down among others could it be made clear that actually the light was him. All right. Okay. Going back to Hiskuni, we still want to figure out when would he have gotten this light and why did he get that light? When God had placed his hand on his face to shield him, when his glory passed and he stood in the opening of a cave in the rock. If you are not familiar with this passage, taken from chapter 33, go back and reread it with all the commentaries you can find. I'm just going to summarize it for the moment, but we've talked about it in past classes, and it is a lifelong journey to truly understand everything that this passage is talking about. In short, Moses asked God to reveal his full essence to Moses. And God said, I can't, because no human can fully understand me. So no matter what I show you, there will always be something missing from your side. But I can show you the back, meaning I can show you me through the after effect of my passing in the world, my moving through the world. Now, this is all meant to be very metaphorical and very deep for the understanding of God through God's reflection through the world. But in that passage, it is structured around the idea of God passing in front of Moses while Moses is in a crack of the rock, in like almost a crevice along the face of the mountain. And it says that when God passes, he puts his hand over the rock so that Moses cannot see his full glory. And then as he passes, the hand is removed and Moses sees God from behind. Again, I've done classes on this before. I can't take the time to try and explain it now because to do so would take the next 40 years. But that is the basic encounter that is held as one of the pinnacles of Moses's experience with God. So he merited this, says Hiskuni, this reminder of that encounter, meaning the glowing is a reminder of when Moses was having this experience with God. The reason that he merited this reminder, which he had not merited when he carried the first set of tablets, was that the first set of tablets had been given publicly for everyone to see. Whereas at the introduction of his ascent to receive the second set, the Torah had expressly warned that no one was to accompany him even at the bottom of the mountain, back at the beginning of chapter 34 and verse 3. So the first set was very public, and there was a discussion of everybody going with him to the foot of the mountain, something we talked about in that Torah portion of Yitro. But now he was very much going alone. Seeing that the giving of the first set of tablets was accompanied by so much publicity, if there had been no visible evidence that Moses had received, some people might have thought that he himself had written on the tablets, seeing that the raw materials had been taken up on the mountain with him also, as it says that Moses wrote the second tablets, or prepared the second tablets, rather than having them be pre-prepared by God. So he needs the glow in order to testify to everyone that indeed he is transmitting what God has asked to be transmitted. Because the people have been more distanced from this second revelation, he needs a more prominent and permanent reminder of his connection to God, so that when he lifts the veil to teach whatever it is that God wishes him to share with the people will recognize that indeed this is what God wishes Moses to teach, that this is not just Moses making it up. He gives one other alternative as well. Seeing that prior to Moses' return with the first set of tablets, the people had been prepared to accept another leader in Moses' place, emitting rays of light on his descent from the mountain this time made a repetition of such an attempt quite unlikely. So we have Mr. Glowing Face with the power of God, and we've got someone else who wants to be leader instead. Who should we pick? Who do we follow? Right? Mr. Glowy Face has been gone for a couple of weeks. Let's just find any old guy to fill his place. No, I think we're going to wait for Mr. Glowy Face. Right? That is a sign of approval from God that basically is job security for the rest of Moses' life. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Torah will know that this did not stop people from challenging Moses. Even though we would have recognized that what he was teaching was indeed what God wanted, that doesn't mean that everybody was always okay with that. And there were numerous attempts, most famous with Korach and the other rebels, but of other people challenging Moses as well, not always for leadership, but over the decisions for the people. But Chizkuni is arguing that the light was necessary because of the changed relationship after the destruction of the first tablets and the creation of the second. Any questions or comments?
Okay. The last part of Chizkuni's comment, that the people, I'm looking at it, I agree with that, but looking at it from the need of the people, because we just find the people wanting this sparkly, glowing golden calf. So as you point out, now they have, someone who has that clearly God has indicated some favor towards. But I'm looking at it, this is really something the people need, because we also just read in the previous section how compassionate, how kind, how merciful Adonai is. And so seeing that the people need this so that they will believe in God's kindness and Adonai's kindness, he did this through Moses, but ultimately for the benefit of the people.
Indeed, and that's sort of a general argument for the entire section that we're in now with the building of the Mishkan and all of its apparatus, that it was for the benefit of the people, not that God in particular wanted a tent, but that the people really looked like they needed something a little bit more constantly reminding of God and of God's presence. And so the idea of Moses glowing as being a parallel to that, I think, is a very supported idea. All right. But there are other opinions of why Moses would have glowed. So let's go ahead and take a look at those as well. When a man betroths a woman, who must provide the payment for the writing of the ketubah? Right? This is a very important legal question. And I know in the modern world, many couples are joining together to pay for their weddings and all of the things that go with it, like the ketubah. But traditionally, there were often arguments over who would be paying for what. I know that in the Western European tradition, people talked about the bride's father being the one paying for the wedding. But we have our own traditions. And in our tradition, one of the things that must be paid for is, of course, the ketubah and any of the documents that go with the marriage. So how do we know who's actually going to pay for what? We know this from the Holy One, blessed be he, when he betrothed Israel on Sinai. Let's look at the biggest wedding ever, God to all of us. And who wrote the document? Moses, right? Moses wrote the document, meaning the Torah, as our kind of wedding document between us and God. And what payment did the Holy One, blessed be he, provide for him? The splendor of his face. As it is written, Moses was not aware that the skin of his face was radiant. So the reason he glowed was because that was his payment for having written the Torah. It's a beautiful way of taking a rather mundane question of who has to pay for which document and using it as this symbol of the marriage between us and God, and of Moses glowing as being a sign of the payment for having written the Torah. Now, Reish Lakish said, at the time he wrote the Torah, Moses acquired the splendor of his face. How did that happen? The Torah was given to Moses, its skin of white fire and written with black fire and sealed in fire and wrapped with fire. This mystical idea of the Torah really being of fire and fire wrapped together in order to illuminate the world. And while he was writing, he wiped his pen reed on his hair. And anyone who's ever done painting will know that it's not entirely unusual for a little bits of paint to end up on your face. And from there, he acquired the splendor of his face. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani disagreed, and said it was from the tablets that Moses acquired the splendor of his face, that it was from being around the tablets themselves that it transferred to him. But I want to work on this idea of Reish Lakish, of that him glowing because he had wiped the pen on his own face. Because Or HaChaim gives us more of this midrash and says, perhaps the rabbis, by teaching this, wanted to teach us that the virtue of humility transcends all other virtues. Note that the Torah testified in Numbers 12 that Moses was the most humble man ever. When God asked him to write these words, Moses found himself unable to spell the word anav, humble, as it should have been spelled, and he omitted the letter yud, that it is written by custom without that extra yud in the letter. Why? Because he was too humble to write about his humility, right? A truly humble person doesn't brag about how humble they are. And so he shortened the word in order to downplay the compliment that was being given to him in the text. Moses was rewarded for this act of humility with the rays of glory. When the sages spoke of leftover ink, meaning the ink that he got in his hair, it was the ink which would have been intended for the writing of the letter Yud. That he had, because we have to imagine that there would have been extra ink because he wouldn't have had surplus ink for writing the Torah if it's, this black fire ink. And when he chose to not put an extra yud in because he was trying to downplay the compliment to himself, that extra fire of Torah becomes entrapped in him, and it sticks to him, and he shines. And of course, this is the exact opposite of being, the least of everyone. He may be humble about it, but everyone else recognizes his greatness. He doesn't realize how he shines, but the community does. He doesn't realize the amazingness with which he has done all that he has done, the leading of us out of Egypt, the giving of Torah. He doesn't realize that he is under a constant state of flashing lightning, illumination that most of us will never experience for more than just a brief moment in our life. Everyone else does. That this extra little bit of glow is this shininess that unfortunately Moses himself didn't always appreciate, of just how amazing he was by what he had accomplished and what he was in order to accomplish what he did. And so that extra little yud shining from within him, I think is just a beautiful way to summarize this personality of Moses himself. Questions or comments before we move on to our final section? All right, so our final section actually goes to our Siddur, to our prayer book. Because from time to time, I like to show how Jewish thinking and Midrash are woven into our Siddur in ways that you may not recognize. So during the Shacharit service, during the section of the Amidah, which is uniquely written to represent the day, it says as follows: Moses will rejoice with the gift that was his portion. For a faithful servant you called him. A crown of glory upon his head you placed when he stood before you on Mount Sinai, and 2 tablets of stone he brought down in his hand, upon which it is written, to preserve Shabbat. So we can see already this idea of the crown of glory, this shininess that would have been attributed to Moses. And we can see that the rabbis probably meant that as being a connection to this notion of Moses being illuminated. But Metzudat Yehoshua a commentary on the Siddur tries to give us another layer of understanding as well by pointing out something that is peculiar about the Shabbat services. Why did our sages institute 3 different forms for the Shabbat Amidah, whereas on festivals, all 3 services have the identical Amidah, meaning that the Amidah section, which has 7 blessings on Shabbat or on a festival, unlike the 19 blessings on a regular weekday, that middle section, which is the unique part for each a day that is special, that middle section is different for the 3 standard parts of the service, meaning for the Mariv, Shacharit, and Mincha service. But on a festival, those same 3 services have the same 3 Amidah text for all of them. It is repetitive, if you will. So Shabbat is the odd one out. It ends up with variety in all 3 of these. And he argues that the reason that there is variety is that these 3 forms signify 3 kinds of Shabbat: the Shabbat of creation, the Shabbat on which the Torah was given, and the Shabbat of the world to come. At Mariv, in the evening service, we say, "You have sanctified the 7th day, the climax of making heaven and earth." It is very clear from the Friday night Amidah that there is a heavy emphasis on the nature of Shabbat as being a reflection of creation itself. At Shacharit, the morning service, we say Moses will rejoice in the gift when he stood before you on Mount Sinai. The text that we just saw is very much pointing to Shabbat as not only a time that celebrates creation, but also a time that celebrates the giving of Torah. Indeed, Shabbat is often argued as being one of the times that God gave us very specifically in order that we would have time to study Torah. For if a person had to work 7 days a week, they might be able to squeeze in a little study here and there, but not much. On Shabbat, however, we have a day that is set aside entirely where we can make more of an effort to study and learn from Torah. And so Shabbat has that special flavor, that special shine, if you will. And at Mincha, we say, "You are one." Now, that doesn't seem very much like the world to come, but then he points out, this reminds us of the Shabbat of the world to come. Indeed, we often say that Shabbat is a foretaste of the world to come, a teaser, a trailer, if you will, where indeed it will be revealed to all that he is one. The true unity of God will be understood not only by us, but by everyone that lives on that final moment of the world to come, Olam Haba. And Shabbat is meant to reflect and rejoice in that as well. And so we have to alter the text of Shabbat, of the Amidah, in order to trigger all of these different thoughts and emotions and spiritual reflections going throughout. And of course, as you can see in Shacharit, one of those is reflecting back on the glory of Moses and the gift of Torah and how it made him shine and how it makes us shine as well. And that concludes our commentary. Do we have any additional questions or ideas, feelings that people would like to share? All right. Stunned silence.
I just have running through my head now the shiny song from Moana.
the shiny, right? Yes, that's a good song, a good song. All right. Well, take care, everyone. Just a little quick update. There'll be an email going out as well, but I have to attend a virtual Shiva tonight for a dear colleague of mine who passed away. And so there will not be Mishnah class tonight. I apologize, but when life cycles happen, sometimes we don't have many choices of rescheduling. We have to be there for their honor and for the family. So I appreciate everyone's understanding. Take care and be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.